Thank you. So let me start us off by talking a little bit about what it is that we're going to see and talk about today. So, as you all know, this is our first webinar on data protection, and this is the first part of a five-part series. You can see the dates for the rest, and I encourage you to diarize them. Let me start by giving a background as to why we are running this series. So, over the past 10 years, data privacy has become a huge deal thanks to all of the new technology and the people becoming more worried about their personal information. And all of this with very good reasons as well. We've seen a lot of the scandals in the papers. So, in this webinar, we'll take a trip through how data protection laws have changed across East Africa. We'll see where these laws started, what's happened along the way, and what the situation is right now. Countries like Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Ethiopia, they've all made a big effort to create laws that protect people's personal information. We'll look at each country's specific laws and see what's working well and where there might be challenges. We'll also compare these laws to some of the big ones around the world, such as the GDPR or the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, and the CCPA or the California Consumer Privacy Act in California. This will help us understand how East Africa is doing on data protection compared to other places and where they might improve. Finally, we'll explore what's coming next for data protection in East Africa. We'll talk about new trends, the impact of technology, and how business can stay on top of things. By working together, we can make sure that data protection stays important as technology keeps growing. So I think together, let's build trust in this digital age. But hey, this is just the first part of our five-part series. And what can we look forward to in the coming weeks? So, on the 27th of June, we are going to be talking about the role of the data protection officers in East Africa. And then a month later, on the 3rd of July, we're going to be talking about data protection for small and medium enterprises or SMEs. 1 month later, on the 7th of August, we will move on to emerging technologies and data protection. And then finally, on the 28th of August, we will look at cross-border data transfers, challenges, and solutions. So without further ado, I'd encourage you, please mark these dates in your calendars and join us for the rest of these series, and encourage your business colleagues to join us as well. We have a strong network of people who we are taking along this journey with us, who are learning with us, and slowly we're gaining a good team of supporters, of the BDO webinar series. So I encourage all of you to join. And now, without further ado, let me introduce my colleague, Paul. Paul, please take it on from here.
Right. Thank you, Zahir. Thank you for the introduction to the webinar series. So I'll just take you through from where we picked off. We started the data protection series back in 2023, where we tackled the acts themselves, the regulations that came in, as well as certain topics that we have covered in depth in the coming series. So overall, we start off with basically the overview of data protection. So across the 5 countries that we have, what we have as BDO East Africa, we've consolidated from all the acts in the various countries, the various principles of data protection. And the principles of data protection are just the fundamental guidelines that govern the collection, processing, storage, and management of personal data to ensure privacy and security. These principles are enshrined in all the laws that we have taken up. And I'll start off with lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. So the principle of LFD is on the lawful side, data must be processed legally with a valid legal basis for each and every processing activity. On the fairness side, data processing should be conducted in a manner that is fair to specifically the data subject. And on transparency, organizations must be transparent about how they collect, how they use, and how they share personal data, providing clear and accessible information to the data subjects and to any individuals, including the regulator. On the purpose limitation, we have the principle that data should be collected for only a specific and explicit purpose, and only legitimate purposes which do not have any further processing are incompatible with those purposes. So you should ensure that you only collect data for a specific purpose, only one. So you cannot collect survey data, for example, and then reuse that data for marketing ventures. On the minimization side, you should minimize the amount of information or personal data that is only necessary for the purposes or the intended purposes for which is being collected or processed. For example, if you do not intend on using PO boxes, or you never send mail through PO box addresses, then you should not collect that data to start with. From an accuracy perspective, personal data must be accurate and where necessary has to be kept up to date. And this is because inaccurate data can be disputed and it should be corrected and deleted without any delay. On a storage limitation perspective, previously you could store data for as long as you want, but the principle of storage limitation requires that personal data should only be kept for the period which it is intended for and not beyond the purposes of its collection. So if you are collecting a survey, for example, and you got all the outputs that you required, you're not supposed to store all the raw data. You should purge it. The principle of integrity and confidentiality. Personal data must be processed in a manner that ensures its security, including protection against unauthorized or unlawful processing, accidental loss, destruction, or damage. And we will look at some of the case studies where there was either unauthorized or unlawful processing. From an accountability perspective, organizations are responsible and must be able to demonstrate compliance with the data protection principles to their respective data protection commissioners in their jurisdictions. And this includes maintaining records of processing activities, conducting impact assessments with the DPIAs, and also ensuring that you have appointed a data protection officer in your jurisdiction as is required. So these principles are designed to ensure that the privacy rights of individuals are protected and their personal data is handled responsibly and ethically by organizations. The keywords here are responsibly and ethically. Compliance with these principles help build trust between data subjects and data controllers or processors, and thus also reduces the risk of data breaches and any other privacy issues. Why is data protection so crucial? So the first aspect is you need to protect sensitive information, and these are sensitive information ranges from names to social security numbers, credit card details, home addresses, student details, and so forth. It is apparent in all the regulations within our region that this the principle of protecting sensitive information has been mentioned. And this is because cyber criminals have been targeting a lot of personal data, and it also prevents identity theft, fraud, and any other malicious activities such as kidnapping, etc. You need to ensure regulatory compliance. So within our jurisdictions, there are very heavy fines on organizations that fail to protect their personal data. And therefore, it is important for you to ensure that you have implemented a robust data protection framework within your organization to ensure that you're not fined for any breach or any mishandling of data. It is also important because it ensures a trust and reputation belief within your data subjects. So in the event of a data breach, you'd be able to maintain your robust protection measures and build and sustain customer trust and loyalty. You also need to ensure that you've implemented robust DP procedures to ensure that you prevent financial losses. The average cost of a data breach is estimated to be around $3.8 million, according to IBM. And data breaches can lead to significant financial losses, either through fines, legal fees, or even the extent of loss of businesses because of bankruptcy. So you need to invest in data protection measures so as to save your organization from these costly consequences. It is important also because you safeguard against cyber threats, and cyber threats such as ransomware attacks, and which is the most apparent danger to data, is where a hacker encrypts your data and then demands a ransom or can sell your data to the highest bidder. So cyber threats like ransomware, phishing, and malware have been on the rise, and we've highlighted this in our recently concluded webinar series on cybersecurity. And therefore, implementing strong data protection measures helps you and your organization against these threats to ensure your business continuity. On the front of supporting ethical practices, it is a requirement that all data should be processed ethically and in a non-profit manner. So ethical data protection practices demonstrates an organization's commitment to respecting the privacy and also the human rights, which nowadays privacy is a human right, and therefore it also fosters a positive public image. To sum it up, data protection is not just a legal requirement, but also a fundamental aspect of running a trustworthy and secure business. Regarding sensitive information, complying with regulations, maintaining trust, preventing financial losses, and enhancing data accuracy enables organizations to ensure long-term success and sustainability as well as stability in this changing world. So, as we have mentioned, the world is changing. Zahir alluded that in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of changes within our jurisdiction with regards to data. And in this digital age, it is important because there's a high explosion of digital data. In 2020, the amount of data that was created, captured, copied, and consumed was 64.2 zettabytes. And this is expected to reach 181 zettabytes by the year 2025. Organizations, governments, businesses, and also individuals are generating vast amounts of data through digital interactions, and this is online transactions, social media, including even Internet of Things, and these are portable devices. There's an increase in cyber threats. The data breaches, which I've highlighted, such as ransomware, phishing, and malware, in 2023 gave an average cost of $4.4 million, which was 15% over the last 3 years. And therefore, financial losses have and legal repercussions have also brought about a lot of interest in ensuring that your data is protected. A good example is the Equifax data breach, which occurred in 2017, and it affected a total of 147 million people in terms of the data subjects and the data that was lost. This cost the company a total of $1.4 billion, and this is back in 2017 in the form of settlements and also fines. Global regulations, such as GDPR, also the CCPA of California, has fined companies well over 3 billion euros since enforcement in 2018. GDPR came in 2016. So if these are the type of legal fines that are being sanctioned against companies abroad, then if we look at it from a local aspect, Kenya Data Protection Act had over 100,000 cases which were sent to them, and they had a determination of a total of 1,098 cases just in the recent year that has concluded. And they have uploaded all those determinations onto their website, so you can actually go and read all about it. 81% of customers also say that they need to trust a brand so as to buy from them or deal with them. Therefore, reputation management fosters consumer trust and also business reputation. An example is Target's 2013 breach, which affected 40 million credit card and debit card accounts, and thus all those people stopped dealing with Target and stopped giving them they no longer had the consumer trust with regards to their financial data. On an economic and competitive advantage point, 73% of consumers are more likely to trust companies that have transparent data practices. This is privacy notices on their websites, cookie policies, and other acceptable practices. So compliance can be leveraged, and an example is how Apple promotes its privacy policies, and this is a key differentiator in its marketing campaigns. On the ethical side, it is important to ensure that you ethically handle personal data. A survey shows that 87% of consumers believe that companies should be regulated to ensure the ethical use of data, and this is to ensure that there is no sharing of data which is not intended for the purpose it was collected for. So let's look at some of the brief history in terms of the protection laws in and around East Africa. There is the EAC, which is the East Africa Commission, has also begun to develop a regional data protection framework, which will be able to harmonize data protection laws across the member states. And as you can see from the infographic, Kenya was one of the very first countries to enact a draft data protection bill. However, it took almost 10 years for this act to be enacted or taken into, signed into law. And a whole year later, when Kenya appointed its first data protection commissioner, Ms. Immaculate Kasai. And thereafter, in 2021, due to the COVID pandemic, there was need for revamping of regulations, especially with regards to transfer and sharing of medical data across the various hospitals. And that led to the 2021 data protection regulations, the guidelines for 2021. Uganda was also on the forefront. In 2014, they made the initial efforts to draft the privacy bill, and it also enacted in 2019. In 2020, the Data Protection Office was also enshrined into law, and this is to ensure that they oversee compliance. Tanzania, in 2015 and 2014 and 2015, the Cyber Crimes Act was also passed. And then in 2020, the Data Protection Act was introduced, where then in 2022, it was finally enacted, and 2023, it now is enforced. Rwanda as well, 2018, the law on protection of personal data and privacy, this was enacted and became one of the very earliest comprehensive data protection laws in the region. In 2019, the establishment of the National Cyber Security Authority was done to enforce all data protection laws, and only up to 2023 was the law enforced. Ethiopia has a proclamation number 958 of 2016, which is basically the computer crime proclamation, and it included some provisions with regards to data protection. However, in 2020, there was a release of the first draft of the Data Protection Act or proclamation, and this is now focusing on a comprehensive data protection and ensuring data protection measures. So over the years, over the last 10 to 15 years, it has been important for all countries to align, and also due to the Malabo Convention, where almost out of the 50 plus member states in Africa, only very few had signed, including the countries that I've listed here. So over now to some case studies, and in the interest of time, we will focus on some of the monumental cases where there are many touch points with regards to how either data was mishandled, data was not did not follow the principles of collection. And I start off with the Huduma case, Huduma number, for those who are aware. And this was in January of 2019. And this, the most important thing about this particular case is that the Huduma number collection was done prior to the enactment of the Kenya Data Protection Act. So at the time when Huduma number, the National Identity Management System, was being collected, and there was a lot of personal and biometric data of almost all Kenyans to be centralized in one national database. The current DPA Act had not even been assented into law. So why is this particular case very important? This is because the High Court, in a ruling, they delivered a clear message that the constitutional right to privacy must be respected, observed, and protected, and this right has been in existence since the Constitution was implemented in 2010 and did not arise with the enactment of the DPA Act of 2019. And therefore, any subsequent legislation which was intended to give effect to the already existing constitutional right was to be clearly ensured within the legal frameworks. And therefore, in its reasoning, the court observed that the DPA, in as much as it was enacted as a supplement to the constitution that was already in existence, the government should have taken extra steps to ensure the right to privacy. The court also further criticized the lack of foresight by the government, stating, and I quote, "It would have been prudent for the state to ensure that the legal framework for the protection and the right to privacy was in place before taking any actions that would likely infringe a constitutional right of a data subject, and in this case, a Kenyan." The court recognized that while DPIA should have been usually carried out prior to processing of data, a fresh DPIA should nonetheless be carried out in line with the current regulations. The decision serves as a reminder to ensure that any processing activities that commenced prior to the enactment of the DPA Act of Kenya in 2019 continually and currently comply with the current DPA Act, including storage and also use of personal data. This is data that was collected before the enactment of the Act. And one serious scenario is that in the event of an investigation by the ODPC with regards to non-compliance, whether you're a data controller or a processor, you need to also ensure that you are compliant in your practices prior to the enactment of the actual act. This extends beyond the carrying out of DPIAs and also includes compliance with notification requirements, technical and security safeguards, as well as organizational systems and procedures. Number two is the White Path Limited and Rigas Kenya case. And this is a case where the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner slapped White Path Limited and Rigas Kenya, each with a fine of $37,000 for breaching data protection laws. White Path had reportedly failed to comply with the ODPC enforcement notice that had been issued in January 2013, and Rigas was non-cooperative and failed to respond to a notification to a complaint in 2022, which was followed up by another reminder in November. And therefore, in a notice, ODPC said that it received close to 150 complaints against White Path alone, alleging that the applications have accessed their mobile phone contracts and are sending unwarranted and unsolicited text messages to contacts within someone's phone. And they had irregularly obtained this information from persons or data subjects' phone book. The complaint against Rigas, on the other hand, alleged that frequent spamming of automated improper information to the complainant, in as much as the data subject had made requests to the respondents to ensure that they stopped. So these complaints against White Path point to a growing concern among the public with regards to debt collection harassment by loan companies or loan app companies. Customers have reported being harassed due to uncouth loan company agents who call them and their contacts with a bid to force them to pay loans. So one of the key measures that also we commend Google for in an announcement that they made just last week is that it would enforce and within the apps themselves, because most of them reside in the Google Play Store, prohibit loan apps from accessing user contacts, external storages, images, videos, contacts, even locations, as well as call records. This is a big move, which we have seen from the giants, the bigger companies, in the attempt to further safeguard data subject rights. There are some two cases. This one is very unique because it was dismissed by the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. And this was the Wamai and Allen Advocates case with regards to one of their former employees. So they allege that one of their firm's former employees, while they were still in employment, sent sensitive confidential information from the corporate email to her personal email and to another former employee who at that particular time had already left the firm's employment. And those two were collectively the respondents. So the documents allege that, and they were shared in the court documents, included legal opinions, bank statements, as well as the correspondence with regards to the emails. The complainants alleged that the Act prohibits data controllers and processors from unlawful disclosing of personal data to third parties that are respondents and breached this provision. So the respondent contested the firm was not registered as a data controller, nor was it registered as a data processor at the time of filing the complaint. Keyword was not registered as a data controller or a data processor. And therefore, the obligations of these roles did not apply to that particular present case. The ODPC affirmed its jurisdiction on the basis that the complaint was properly filed and related to issues that fell within the Act. However, with regards to this particular case, any firm that had not registered as a data controller or processor lacked the preclude compliance with regards to their rights as data controllers and also data processors within their obligations under this particular Act. Therefore, ultimately, the complaint was dismissed on the principal basis that most of the documents cited by the complainants were either not availed to the ODPC for inspection to determine the nature of the information disclosed, and also the fact that it was impossible to determine whether they had been a breach as alleged by the complainants. The ODPC carried out investigations and found that most of the documents cited had been disclosed and were related to cases within Kenya Law Reports website, and therefore this is information that was publicly available. And therefore, on this particular case, the judicial records containing the personal data being public records at the time of when they were being transmitted, therefore the case was dismissed. In the end, the ODPC held that the complainants had not shown how their own personal or sensitive data had been infringed in their capacity as data subjects. So these are the key take-homes from this particular decision. The protections under the Act on the filing of complaints accrue for the benefit of natural persons and not legal or jurisdictional persons, such as corporate entities. A data controller and a data processor needs to be registered under the Act for the obligations of that Act to apply to them. Registration by itself is a compliance requirement. A complainant must also avail all documents that they allege that the subject of be subject of a breach to the ODPC for them to decide on whether the documents contain any personal data or whether there was any unauthorized disclosure. The ODPC has the investigatory powers, and then contrary to traditional Kenya dispute resolution mechanisms, ODPC will not solely rely on the evidence produced by these parties in making the decision. It may also collect and use its own evidence to determine the complaint pleaded before it. And from this, we can see that we can anticipate that there are more complaints that will continue to be investigated by ODPC in this particular manner and will then be dismissed because of those particular issues that I have mentioned. The fourth case is Oppo Kenya, and this was one of the very first fines penalty notice that was issued. And this is because the ODPC has a mandate to issue a penalty notice under the Data Protection Act. The ODPC issued an enforcement notice against Oppo Kenya after it infringed the privacy of a complainant by using their photo on a social media platform without their consent, contrary to what the Act states. I want to emphasize the bit on without the consent of the data subject. For failing to receive a response from OPPO, the ODPC then issued a penalty notice and indicated that OPPO refused to cooperate. One, by failing to develop a policy for compliance with the Act, failing to adduce a data protection policy pursuant to the enforcement notice issued, and lacking proof that it had developed internal complaint mechanisms to address data subject rights. In the end, ODPC penalized OPPO Kenya shillings 5 million for its failure to comply with the Act and its regulations. So what can we learn from this particular case? The ODPC has started to take enforcement action, and there is an urgent need for data processors and controllers to ensure that they are compliant with the Act and the regulations. It also shows us that enforcement notices must be taken seriously to avoid ODPC issuing penalty notices. Enforcement notices will set out areas of non-compliance under the Act, and these are open, remediable areas of a company's operation or processes. Number three is that the fine of 5 million, which was issued, is a large sum and it's the highest available within the Act and its regulations, meaning that the ODPC will not hesitate to impose high fine for breaches for any company of any size. The decision was reported in the media and posted on the ODPC social media website. This is on Twitter and also their website. And this has a potential adverse reputation, which basically would impact the publicly issued decisions, and this should not be understated. It's important to note that some of these decisions may be appealed to the High Court for determination, and it remains to be seen whether the parties in these recent decisions will appeal for those particular ODPC findings. And in summary, these decisions highlight the importance of ensuring your legal advisors have a thorough and comprehensive understanding of the Act, as well as your employees, first to ensure that the practical steps that you take within your organization ensures that you are compliant. So some of the challenges in data protection are, we basically note that there's lack of awareness and education. So many organizations, especially small ones, lack the awareness of the data protection laws within their country and their jurisdiction, or even to a country where they're transferring data to. So this basically has an impact of increased non-compliance, either in your host nation or in the nation that you're transferring to. Maybe you have an office in another jurisdiction. And this would now lead to basically more fines, or maybe basically just being penalized by even the country that you're sending the data to. Organizations may struggle to keep up with the pace with the changing laws, so as to, and how they apply those laws to their operations. Without proper education and awareness programs, employees may inadvertently violate data protection regulations, which leads to compliance failures and potential legal consequences. Number two on our list is resource constraints, and one of these challenges is limited budgets. Basically, allocating resources for data protection measures is very challenging, especially in the current economic times. And we see this mostly in the small and medium-sized enterprises. We'll cover more on this in part 3 of this particular webinar series, so stay tuned to that. There's also, with regards to resource, lack of skilled personnel. This is a shortage of skilled professionals who are capable of implementing and managing a robust data protection practice, and specifically the DPO role, the data protection officer role. Again, this is part 2 of our webinar series, so please stay tuned to ensure that you get maximum value out of that particular webinar. Number 3 is the complex regulatory landscape. So there's the aspect of multi-jurisdictional compliance. I've mentioned this, is that organizations who are operating in multiple countries must ensure that they navigate the diverse regulatory frameworks, which basically leads to complexity and sometimes potential conflicts. So another issue here is also on the rapidly evolving laws. So as you've seen in previous slides, each and every act that has been enacted within a specific country was followed up by regulations within at least a year or two after the ODPC of that particular country stepped into office. Multinational organizations face this challenge of complying with various or varying data protection regulations across the different jurisdictions that they operate in. So this not only increases compliance costs, but also introduces a lot of legal uncertainties. Moreover, the frequent updates and amendments to the protection laws make it very challenging for organizations to maintain compliance over time. Failure to keep abreast with these regulatory changes can result in gaps in compliance within one country to another and leave organizations very vulnerable to penalties and sanctions from the various jurisdictions. There is the aspect of data security threats, and this is cyber threats, insider threats, cyber threats such as ransomware, phishing scams. They are exposing a lot of organizations to data breaches, and therefore most organizations are opting to first go for the cyber side of things and ensuring cyber compliance before they opt for data protection compliance. There is a threat of internal or insider people, and this is what we call insider threat. And these are your employees, and it can either be maliciously or can also be just negligence, as you saw in the case of Wamai, where the employee sent this to a current employee sent to a former employee without knowing that that was a breach of policy. So while external threats like malware and hacking attacks are well-known risks, the insider threats also pose a significant challenge as well. And therefore, employees may accidentally expose data either through negligent behavior, intentionally or intentional misuse of data, either for personal gain or even for just malicious purposes. There is a big headache with regards to data localization requirements. And within the laws, there are some legal requirements that impose data localization requirements, mandating that certain data must be stored and processed within that particular country's borders. There's also the operational challenges with regards to data localization, which can be very costly because you'll have to set up data centers within each and every particular country that you operate in. So compliance may require several investments and infrastructure so as to establish either data centers or just a secure cloud storage solution within specific jurisdictions. Data localization laws may conflict with international data transfer mechanisms, such as the cross-border data flows, and thus bringing a big headache with regards to compliance requirements. So balancing these legal requirements with operational considerations is essential to navigate data localization requirements effectively while still maintaining business continuity and compliance with regulatory obligations. There's data privacy concerns. So there's consumer expectations. So most of the data subjects have a growing consumer awareness. And this is with regards to, they have a lot of concerns about data privacy and organizations that they are providing data to. And therefore, a challenge is you might be operating in a jurisdiction where the data subjects are very aware and alert to the requirements or their rights as data subjects. And therefore, you have to align, or the expectation might be higher. You also find cases where someone has moved from a very high regulatory environment, such as EU, for example, and they step into maybe Kenya or Uganda, where the law is a bit lax, and therefore they expect that that with the country that they're operating in, they will be able to impose the larger regulations without taking into account the specificities of the local regulation. The vice versa also applies where someone moves their business or operates within a lower regulation environment to a higher regulation environment. And this can give a lot of compliance challenges. So again, it's not limited to just a particular industry. You could see, for example, the HIPAA, which is with regards to the health side of things. There's also GDPR, CCPA. GDPR is very specific to EU. CCPA is very specific to California. And therefore, you need to balance and achieving transparency within these particular jurisdictions so as to localize your data requirements and have the privacy concerns of that particular jurisdiction that you're in. We have vendor management and third-party risk, which is one of the major challenges because there is high dependency on vendors. Organizations often rely on third-party vendors for various services, and therefore this exposes them to a lot of potential data protection risks or data breaches. So you may be in a company that is in manufacturing, but then you've outsourced your dispatch and distribution to another company, and you have to provide specific details of this data subject to enable that distribution company to fulfill the delivery. In such an instance, you have outsourced that process as well as the risk. If the data breach occurs on that side, the data subject may hold you liable because you are the data controller. With regards to data retention and deletion, and this is a very big, especially in the East African community, where there's this belief that as long as you have the data, you should not delete it. I don't know where that came from, but anyway, establishing data retention policies within organizations is becoming a big challenge because, again, there are other regulatory bodies that may even request data beyond your retention period. So, for example, KRA has a requirement of maintaining at least 7 years of financial records. You might also align your data protection storage purposes or the principle of data retention to just 8 years. And if you fall into an investigation, KRA may require to go back maybe 10 years, maybe 12 years, yet that data you've already purged. So data deletion, also, the processes are not so clear. As you may have heard in the news, there was the iOS update, I think it was 17.3 or 17.5, where it brought back images that had been deleted way over 5 years before even that particular update had been brought to life. So most data subjects were wondering, if I have deleted this information from this particular device, why is it that when I've run a software update, it has brought back photos that I had taken and deleted way back? And this is because of the iCloud storage feature. So that raised concerns with regards to, am I being able to fully delete this data? Or is it possible that with time, this data then can come back to haunt me? A good example was a data subject who had a device, iOS, an Apple device, and sold it to a friend. And when that friend loaded, and he made sure he wiped the device clean, and this was through the hard reset where you delete everything, including any updates. So when that particular new buyer of that particular device or the friend, when they loaded the new update, it loaded this previous owner's images into the gallery. So that also brings a challenge with regards to now this cloud storage in the current modern day. Organizations must ensure that they implement robust data protection policies. They must invest in education and training, and also adopt technologies that mitigate risks to ensure that you are compliant. What are some of the questions you ask before you implement a robust data protection framework? The first question you need to ask yourself is, what data do we collect and what data do we store? You need to clarify the types of data that you collect, including personal, sensitive, and business critical data. You also need to determine the purpose of data collection and the storage to align this to the legal requirements within your jurisdiction and the organizational objectives. The second question is, where is this data being stored or even being processed? You need to identify the locations where data is stored, including on-prem servers, cloud environments, and even third-party systems, especially for those with API integrations. Assess these risks associated with the data storage and with regards to the locations, and ensure that you are compliant with the data localization requirements, especially if you are required to hold certain types of data within a specific border of a country. Question number 3 is, who has access to this data? You need to define the roles and responsibilities for accessing and managing data within your organization. And this can only be done by implementing strong access controls and permissions so as to limit the unauthorized access and prevent data breaches. I go back to the case of Wamai. Number 4 is how do we protect the data? So you have to evaluate your existing security measures and implement more stronger, basically controls such as encryption, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and any other security technologies to safeguard the data from unauthorized access. You need to ask yourself the question on what are my legal and regulatory requirements that apply to me and my business. So you need to understand the data protection laws and regulations within that particular jurisdiction that you operate in and any other jurisdiction that you have present, as well as the specific industry. So if the industry has a specific act or requirement with regards to data protection, I reference HIPAA for the health industry. You need to ensure that you both safeguard you both implement the HIPAA controls as well as the localized, let's say it's Kenya Data Protection Act requirements. Number 6 is how do we handle data breaches? So this is a very important question, and you need to develop a data breach response plan which identifies procedures for both detecting, reporting, as well as mitigating breaches. You also need to conduct regular training and simulations to ensure that staff readiness is high to respond to basically effectively any data breach so as to minimize the impact. Number 7 is do we obtain consent for data processing? And this is very specific if there's the requirement for consent. So you need to review all your data processing activities to determine whether they require valid consent, and if the valid consent is given from or it has been obtained from these individuals, and therefore you can implement transparent consent mechanisms first to provide individuals with options to control their data. Specifically because in all our jurisdictions, consent can be withdrawn at any particular time. Number 8 is, are our third-party vendors compliant? You need to assess your data protection practices within your third-party vendors as well as your service providers. You must also require that your vendors adhere to the data protection standards and the contractual obligations so as to mitigate third-party risks. Question number 9 is how do we monitor and audit our compliance levels? So you need to also ensure that you have monitoring mechanisms to establish and track compliance with regards to the data protection policies, and this is usually done through a tracker. And you need to perform regular audits and assessments to identify vulnerabilities, assess your risks, and also ensure continuous improvement. In this case, if you do not have the capacity to do it in-house, you can also contract a third-party company, an audit firm, which can then perform this service for you and also monitor it for you in the short and also long term. Number 10 is, are our employees trained on data protection? This is the most important and most critical question that you need to ask yourself. And you need to ensure that you provide comprehensive training and awareness programs to your employees, first to educate them on data protection policies, procedures, as well as the act within the jurisdictions they operate in. You need to also foster a culture of data privacy and security awareness, first to empower your employees to fulfill their roles. In conclusion, you need to emphasize the importance of asking these questions critically so as to lay the foundation for a robust data protection framework. The question should be asked from the top and also from the bottom. You need to encourage all staff within your organization to address these questions systematically and continuously so as to be able to adapt to the various data protection laws, practices, and to ensure that you mitigate against the evolving threats and also the very highly evolving regulations within our jurisdictions. We've looked at some of the challenges and some of the questions that you need to ask yourself. And despite these challenges, there are very many success stories of organizations that have taken proactive steps to implement data protection measures, and they have seen significant benefits. These are some of the various steps that almost all the organizations that we looked into have implemented as best practices. Best practice number 1 is they all conducted a data audit. This is to identify all data that is collected, processed, and they maintain their record of processing activities, their ROPAs, as well as their data inventories. They also manage to classify data based on sensitivity, importance, and regulatory requirements, therefore knowing what data is paramount to protect and which one is supplementary. It doesn't mean you should not protect it, but it is second to the first bit. They all assess the risks and vulnerabilities, and this is with regard to performing vulnerability assessments, penetration testing to ensure that their systems which hold the data are safeguarded from cyber events. And they also use this exercise to ensure that they improve on their existing frameworks and on a cyber side so as to protect the data side. Number three is you need to develop data protection policies, and to do this, you need to establish comprehensive data protection policies and procedures based on the regulatory requirements and your specific organization needs, not just copy pasting another company's data protection policy and trying to implement it within yours. You also need to define all the roles and responsibilities for data protection officers within your organizations if you have many. All these companies that we reviewed implemented the technical controls, and these are the security technologies such as encryption, physical access controls, logical access controls, and also data loss prevention systems to protect the loss of data or the unauthorized access of data. Number five was all companies provided their employees with robust training. So you need to ensure that you educate your employees on data protection policies and procedures and also the best practices. You need to offer training programs so as to raise the awareness level of data security risks within your organization, which is an important key to compliance. With regards to consent management, you need to, all these organizations reviewed all the consent requirements of the data or the data subjects, and they obtained valid consent from individuals, as well as implemented mechanisms for revoking any consent that had been previously given, and therefore helps them maintain the requirement of minimization, one, and also the rights of data subjects. Continuous monitoring and audit compliance. You need to establish monitoring mechanisms first to ensure that you comply with the data protection policies. You just don't do an audit and then you forget all about it, or the recommendations that were mentioned in the audit report are then benched and never implemented. These companies went ahead and implemented almost all the recommendations and continuously performed regular audits to identify areas of non-compliance and also areas for improvement. You need to ensure vendor compliance. You need to assess your data protection practices of your third-party vendors. It will be soon a requirement, as we have seen in other developed nations, that as long as you're registered as a controller or a processor, you cannot do business with someone who's not registered. So third-party vendors, you will need to either select only those who are compliant with data protection laws within your country if these laws are passed. Last but not least is to ensure that you stay updated and you evolve. So you need to keep abreast of all the changes in the data protection laws, regulations, and industry standards. You also need to continuously evaluate and update your data protection measures first to address any emerging threats and any compliance requirements that pop up within your jurisdiction. To do this, you need to be registered with the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner within your jurisdiction. You also need to stay up to date by checking their social media feeds, also on the determinations and the cases that they have posted on their website. You need to read through some of those determinations to ensure that none of the cases that have been either fined are almost similar to a case that can be exposed within your organization itself. There are tools for basically effective data protection framework. There's data protection software solutions which you can implement, such as Symantec data loss prevention system, or even the McAfee total protection. And there's another one called Varonis data security platform. And these solutions basically automate your compliance tasks They monitor data access within your platforms and also enforce security policies so as to ensure safeguarding information. Some of these tools have evolved, driven, built AI and behavioral monitoring analysis, which is a plus for anyone who uses this tool. Another resource is a PIA tool, which is basically a privacy impact assessment tool. Examples include OneTrust, there's TrustArc, and also Nimity, which are solutions which are easily accessible and easily to plug and play into your environment. And these tools help your organization with regards to assessing privacy risks associated with data processing activities. And they are very aligned towards GDPR. And therefore, it reduces the effort that you would need to then localize to your local jurisdiction. There is data mapping and inventory tools. The simplest data mapping and data inventory tool is Microsoft Excel. However, there are certain tools such as Data Gravity and Data Inventory, which help you visualize and document your data flows from inception to deletion. And these tools help organizations identify storage locations, understand data usage patterns, as well as to comply, especially with GDPR data mapping requirements. The training and educational resources, and they exist, there are very many. So there's the International Association of Privacy Professionals, the IAPP training courses. There's also the Udemy data protection course and the LinkedIn Learning Privacy and Data Protection courses. And these ones are the free courses that are available easily. And such resources will help you as a DPO or as a data subject or even as an employee of an organization to provide you with data protection laws and regulations and best practices, which then you can use to enhance your compliance awareness. There are compliance frameworks and guidelines, and this is specific to those organizations that align to a specific industry standard. So there's the compliance checklist for HIPAA. There's the ISO 27001 checklist. There's also the NIST cybersecurity framework. And if you comply to any of these internationally accepted frameworks, most cases, 99.9%, you have complied with data protection. You need to perform or you basically document your data protection impact assessment. And there are various tools. The best tool for this is, again, Excel, because it's easier for you to, it's free, and you can also be able to track this and keep it up to date as fast as possible. And these templates guide organizations through the process of conducting DPIAs and therefore mitigating the privacy risks associated with data processing activities. There's a data breach response plan template, again on Excel, or you can also use the NIST framework or the FTC framework for data breach management. And these are resources that are available online. And they outline the steps of detecting, containing, mitigating, and also quenching the impact of any data breach to minimize any reputational damage. There are also some online compliance portals and resources. For Kenya, the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner website has a lot of information, guidelines on data protection. There's also the International Association of Privacy Professionals website, the IAPP website. And these portals offer documents, toolkits, templates that help organizations understand and comply to data protection regulations effectively. Whereas most of these are primarily tailored towards GDPR, because within the East Africa and also the larger Africa environment, we are very aligned towards GDPR with very minimal changes here and there. So if you implement some of these tools, then all you need is to revamp the remaining 5% of compliance so as to localize your compliance levels to the requirements of your jurisdiction. Right, we've looked at where data protection has come from, some of the trends that are the current trends, some case studies of regulation. Now let's look at what are some of the future trends we hope to see in the near future or within the next 3 years. This is because data protection is an ever-evolving field, and emerging trends such as AI, increased regulation, and the growing importance of cybersecurity are shaping the future of how we handle data. These are some of the predictions of what we anticipate to happen within the very short term. The first and most important thing is artificial intelligence and machine learning to aid in data privacy. So AI-based security solutions are being deployed to identify and respond to data breaches in real time without having a DPO engaged. There's a financial institution in Rwanda that managed to use AI to analyze transaction patterns and also detect fraudulent activities. And this reduced fraud by 30%. AI and ML can analyze vast amounts of data, detect anomalies and potential threats that any other traditional methods that you have implemented or even human ability cannot be able to meet. And these technologies can learn and they can adapt and improve over time. So predictive analysis is the future right now, and we anticipate that this will mitigate a lot of security threats before they occur, as well as prevent data breaches. Number two is zero trust architecture. So the zero trust architecture is where basically there's absolutely no trust, whether it's a device or an authentication. Every single time you have the platform only allows you to authenticate at that particular time and does not use a historical authentication mechanism. So implementing zero trust principles, where every request is access request is authenticated, authorized, and encrypted for internal users within your company is the way to go in the near future. And this model, the zero trust model, operates on the principle that no one, whether an insider or an outsider of the network, is trusted, and this comes by default. So continuous verification and strict access controls help prevent unauthorized access and data breaches. There is the concept of PBD, which is privacy by design, and companies are integrating privacy features into the development of new products as part of their SDLC procedures. So privacy by design involves embedding privacy into the design of any architecture of your systems, your databases, or even your networks. And this proactive approach will ensure that data protection is built as a fundamental component of any new system or any new process before it is even deployed. There is increased regulation in global standards, basically. And so there are so many countries right now that are introducing comprehensive data protection regulations over and above their data protection acts which were enacted. So increasing need is trying to harmonize the global compliance levels within various jurisdictions. And harmonization of data protection standards will then allow for ease of cross-border transfers, which will be part 5 of our webinar, and would be able to facilitate international business operations and data transfers seamlessly as long as the country that you're transferring to has an accord or has a similar level of an act or regulation levels within its jurisdiction. There's blockchain security, basically using blockchain to secure your transactions, to enhance transparency and traceability. So blockchain provides decentralized and immutable ledger. Basically, it cannot be edited, and the same copy resides on both parties. So any changes with regards to accuracy principle, any changes to one copy reflect automatically in any other existing copies that exist out there. Applications using blockchain basically will improve the data protection aspects, as well as ensure that there are secure transactions. Is also identity verification and also compliance tracking. Number 6 is the enhanced encryption techniques and adoption of advanced encryption methods. And one of the big talking points is the homomorphic encryption, which allows data to be processed without being decrypted. So you do not have to, the traditional encryption is you encrypt the data, you pass it on while it's encrypted, and then you share a decryption key, which then decrypts the data, and then the person who is receiving the data can then be able to view the data. With regards to homomorphic encryption, it allows you to then process this data without having to first decrypt it. So there will be no loss of decryption keys. Encryption is the cornerstone of data security. Advanced techniques, such as mentioned, such as homomorphic encryption, will enable secure data processing without exposing any sensitive information. There's also quantum encryption, which is another emerging area, which is promising unbreakable encryption principles using quantum mechanics. So the physicists in this call will understand quantum computing. So that level of encryption would even prevent a supercomputer from getting the algorithms or the encryption keys with regards to that particular data encryption level. Most people went for AES 128 all the way to 512, but now with quantum encryption, it is infinite. Another trend that we'll see is a lot of data masking and anonymization, and this has already is more or less being done by almost everyone. And this technique helps protect sensitive information, basically rendering any sensitive data unreadable, and also removing any identifiable information. So if you extract a customer ledger or maybe a ledger of all a bank's customers, various columns with regards to their age, maybe their date of birth, any sensitive information, or even their gender, would then be automatically anonymized or will be obfuscated or masked. And therefore, even when you're transmitting this data, it is only for the columns that you have chosen. The ones that are not to be transmitted or viewed, they remain unreadable to that particular recipient. Finally, is the user-centric privacy controls. And this is providing users with more control over their data, customizable privacy settings. And we are seeing this a lot on social media platforms where they allow you, for example, WhatsApp, you can block the number of people who you want to view your WhatsApp status, for example. And these privacy controls are specific to a user's needs and not something that is coming pre-built with any application that you buy. So you will be able to customize your specific user needs with regards to privacy. And this will empower users with more control over their data. And this brings out the aspects of trust and transparency. So what do we predict for the future? We predict a lot of widespread adoption of AI and ML. We'll see more AI-driven solutions, and I believe most of you have seen that any service provider that you had, your firewall provider or your database backup provider, they have a new update or a new feature which they've slapped AI and ML on top of it. But you need to also look at the solution itself, and there are also other risks that come with AI and machine learning. We also see a global harmonization of data protection laws. So as more countries continue to enact their privacy and their data protection regulations and the acts within the organizations, it will end up into harmonization of global compliance. So organizations will not have to then navigate a complex landscape of wondering what's happening in this jurisdiction, and it will allow you to move across the region, and the cross-border data transfer aspects will then be eased up. I've spoken on quantum computing and encryption. We'll also see an increased focus on ethical data use. And because of the growing emphasis by data subjects for ethical use of their data, it will ensure that everyone aligns with the societal values that respect privacy. And transparency and accountability will be the key themes with regards to data protection in the near future. There's also going to be a lot of integration of privacy enhancing technologies. So all the privacy enhancing technologies, data protection tools, firewalls, etc., will then have multi-party computation. Basically, all these tools will be able to communicate with each other. And if you're transmitting an encrypted in any data set which is encrypted through a platform that previously would not note that as an encrypted and would still transmit it, maybe it's a firewall, it will then block that. So once all these privacy enhancing technologies are integrated, which is in the near future, it will help organizations and also individuals to balance their data utility as well as any of their privacy concerns. There'll be a growth of data sovereignty and data localization, and data sovereignty concerns basically will lead to stricter data localization requirements, with countries demanding that their data be stored and processed only within their borders. This is a trend we are seeing a lot with the EU, whereby they are passing stronger or more stringent requirements within GDPR, because other countries have already caught up to the existing act or even the regulations. So we'll start to see more of the developed countries moving one step further, and the countries who have not basically developed any acts will start to enact those acts. And the key aspect on this will be mostly on data localization. There's user empowerment and also data portability, which is a prediction. We'll start to see users will start demanding more control over their data, including the ability to port their data between a service provider or even a device. Data portability will become a standard in the near future, and this will enhance autonomy and trust. And especially for those, maybe I use an example, those who are on the Android platforms. If you have an Android laptop, an Android phone, an Android tablet, you would want a centralized data source, so that if you delete something on one device, it deletes across all the other devices. And we're seeing that also on the iOS Apple environments. So that brings us to the end of this webinar. Let's take a small recap on what we've discussed today. So the data protection compliance, basically globally and also in East Africa, is a very complex landscape to navigate. And this is because it is shaped by evolving regulations, different levels of technological advancement within various countries, and also the changing consumer expectations. Throughout this webinar, we explore the journey of data protection compliance within the region and some of the specific areas, the historical development, current trends and challenges, and we also analyze some case studies with regards to rulings involving prominent companies within Kenya. Additionally, we examined the tools, resources, and best practices that are available to organizations so as to effectively mitigate any data risks. So the key takeaways is you need to have an understanding of your regulatory landscape. You also need to prioritize security and privacy. You need to learn from case studies and draw insights from the real world data protection rulings that have already been issued within your country or even globally. You need to implement tools and resources that leverage on data protection as well as cybersecurity. You need to ensure continuous improvement. This is with regards to training of your employees, the organization's level of data protection compliance, and also in certain instances where the resources are limited, you can make use of firms such as BDO to perform some of these tasks for you, so as to improve your levels to at least a bare minimum within that particular jurisdiction. All right, so now I hand over to Meha, who will take us through the Q&A section.
Thank you, Paul, for a very insightful webinar on data protection, where you spoke about the history, case studies, and future trends, and we look forward to the next webinar. So I'll give you all a few minutes to submit your questions in the Q&A tab. And in the meantime, I'll send the link for the next webinar. So please do register in advance. And yes, it's going to be on the chat. Thank you.
Right, there's a question from Frank Leonidas. Thanks for the question, a compliance manager at AB in Bev Africa. So you'd like to understand who is supposed to register as a data controller or as a data processor as per the Persons DPA Act of, basically the new act in Tanzania. So anyone who collects or processes data. So in the sense that the definitions of a controller and a processor are very clearly defined. The best definition of a controller is someone who has, who determines a decision or makes a decision on the data. A processor is someone who's not determining a decision, but is acting on a decision that has been given by the controller. For example, in a simplified scenario, there's a bank which you're a member of. So that data, the bank has data about you with regards to your date of birth, your name, your marital status, etc. So they have data sets about you. So the bank is a data controller. The bank wants to issue you with a loan, for example, and therefore they want to run your credit history. So they will run it through a credit reference bureau. In that case, the credit reference bureau is acting on an instruction from the bank because they're not making a decision. They're just processing your data set so that they can send it back to the bank to make a decision. In this case, the CRB is a processor because they are not acting on, they're not making a decision on that data. They are just processing and sending it back to a controller for further use. So in your case, if you would apply any of those two scenarios, if not, you can reach out privately away from this, and we'll be able to determine which category basically you should follow. In certain institutions such as Kenya, you may be also required to register as both a controller and a processor, as long as you perform any of those two activities. It's not cast on stone that you A, B, C, D, you have to. In Tanzania, the act just says any person who's collecting or processing data. So it's not limited to, or it does not give a small list of those people who must, but it just, therefore, it is to be interpreted that it is everyone. Right. There's Victor from Kenya. Do you offer certification, tuition, or any courses? Yes, we do. We do not really offer certification courses, but we also offer training on data protection. We have the outsourced data protection service. Basically, you outsource video as the DPO, and also the most critical one, which is a data audit or a data privacy assessment exercise. That is the usual kickstart of where you'd be able to identify any gaps with regards to data privacy. So that is where you basically start. Right, I think that covers the chat. I don't know if there was any questions in the Q&A.
Over to you, Meha. I think we can wrap up.
Yeah, with regards to the cases, there is that if you just Google ODPC determinations, there are over, I think right now they are at 2909 in terms of various determinations with regards to cases that they've either ruled over or they've dismissed. So they are documenting each and every incident that is reported to them. After the investigation, they perform an entire analysis and they send that onto their website. There are very many cases. In the interest of time, we will not be able to cover that in this particular webinar. But there are so many cases that are of a different type of nature. The ones that we covered here had various touch points, and we just needed to touch on those ones. But there is also CCTV. There's a case on CCTV in nightclubs. And consent in and around recording. There is a case on biometrics, collection of biometrics at a point of entry within a building. There's also the case of Airbnbs collecting information about a potential or basically a resident or someone who has booked a specific Airbnb. So there's determinations which are positive in nature, some are negative in nature. It all depends on how the determination was made. So just take some time, spend some time, go on to any of those websites. You'll get a ton load of information. There's a question from Kelvin Sang, so regarding audit. If you're collecting audit evidence from clients of an institution, or updating AWPs which contain client information, will you be required to register for anything? It depends if you're collecting as an individual and the purpose for collection. So the purpose is audit evidence. So you don't, that is the primary purpose is audit. So if you have a contract with an organization to perform an audit, then all the privacy requirements should be within the contract. I'm not saying that they're always there, but they should be. So any other procedures that you're conducting within the audit process, you don't then need to break them down granularly. But with regards to registration, it's anyone who's either a controller or a processor. So if you are a controller, in this case, if you're an auditor, you might be a controller because you're collecting the data to make a decision on it. You can also be a processor where you're basically being given a task to perform or do some bit of analytics, and then you send it back for decision making. So at the end of the day, the question you should ask yourself is, am I a controller or am I a processor? If you fall in any of those two categories, then you have no choice. Registration is a requirement by itself, even before you think about whether you fall on this or that side. Registration, as long as there are certain key requirements in each and every jurisdiction, you must follow that first and then proceed on to stage 2. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our webinar series. We'd like to bring to your attention that we will be having an internal audit webinar. Basically, this is the shaping of tomorrow's internal auditor, navigating the future of that particular profession, which is the internal audit profession. The link has been posted by Meha in the chat box. And we also need to notify you that we do offer these certifications, and we have partners who offer these certifications for various specific data protection courses. So you can reach out to Meha Patel on the email that has been posted. And yeah, that brings us to the end of this particular webinar. We would like to just also reiterate that we are running a 5-part series. So in June, we will be having the role of data protection officers. So be sure to tune in to that so that you can be able to understand what are the daily, weekly, monthly, annual requirements of a data protection officer. We'll then move to how to effectively implement data protection with a specific focus for SMEs, again, due to the budget constraints. After that, we look at emerging technologies in data protection in more detail, such as quantum encryption, as well as homomorphic encryption. And we'll close this off with cross-border transfers and the challenges and solutions, which will help you basically navigate the complex nature of cross-border transfers. We thank you for your engagement and your thoughtful questions that you've made this webinar a truly enriching experience. As we conclude, our knowledge and commitment to knowledge sharing does not end here. This particular webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel, and you can follow us on any of our social media platforms and pages and on LinkedIn to get more information as we post most of our content there. Thank you, and I'd like to end this webinar here, wishing you a lovely end of day, and see you on the 12th for part 2. Thank you.